Hello. So this is an overview of World War One. Feel free to take notes in this lecture, but I will also be providing a reading to go along with this that gives a lot more detail than what I'm going to cover in this video. But I've heard from many of you that these videos are helpful, so I hope that this video doesn't go into too much detail, but enough where if you just wanted to listen to a review over World War One, hopefully, again, it could be helpful. So let's dive in. Here's some background information on World War One. Now, keep in mind, World War One in a U.S. history class is a little bit different than World War One in a world history class. So really, this is the basic information that you need to know about World War One. Sorry. World War One took place from 1914 to 1918. But what you need to realize is in our involvement, the United States involvement, is only from 1917 to 1918. There were the main causes of World War One, and obviously I use that word main as an acronym. These are pretty much the main causes of World War One and World War Two. Honestly, if you get all four of these together, I bet another world war would happen. M stands for militarism. This was definitely happening in our world during this time. There was a massive arms race, meaning every country was trying to build the best military, have the best weapons, and there was definitely competition of who was on top. Alliances, basically countries had buddies. They had made secret alliances that the rest of the world did not know about. And honestly, in my opinion, World War One kind of accidentally happened. It just formed a ripple effect. I think this was an issue between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. I don't think it needed to span into the scope that it did, but again, when you have signed up in an alliance with another country and you have said that you are going to defend them and help them, then yeah, it kind of spirals. It's kind of like at South, when we used to have these fights happen on campus. Maybe a conflict between two people would then spiral into this massive conflict because everyone's friends have to get involved. Oh, that's my little sister, or that's my cousin, and now you're jumping in, and now it's this big ordeal when it could have just been solved between maybe those two people. Imperialism is for I. You guys know imperialism by now, right? Well, the problem with imperialism is when multiple countries are trying to be the best, when multiple countries are expanding their empire, when they're fighting over territories and fighting over world power, that definitely can cause a world war. And the last one, letter N, is nationalism. Nationalism basically means patriotism. But this can get extreme once you have a little too much pride for your ethnic group or nation. It can actually be a motivation to go to war. So keep in mind, Maine is going to come back because when we look at World War II, these are going to be the same four things that caused World War II. Again, as you remember from last year, hopefully, World War I was a conflict between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Just as long as you have that in the back of your mind, that's all that matters. Again, a little different for US history. Make sure you know who the Central Powers are, who's on that side, and who the Allied Powers are. Okay, this is World War I we're talking about. We will keep that same title for Allies in World War II, but then it'll be Allies versus Axis powers in World War II. So just make sure you do know the difference. If you see a question referring to Central Powers, that should channel you into World War I. Okay, but again, this is AP US history. So why is America getting involved in this world conflict? Yes, we have been imperialistic. We've been an imperialist country, but we're not generally involved in European issues. If you haven't noticed, we've kind of stayed in the Western Hemisphere. We're taking over territories in Latin America, Central America. I mean, we took over Hawaii and Alaska, but we're kind of staying in our zone of the earth. we have not been that heavily involved in European affairs. So, what dragged us into World War I? Well, first off, you have to know who our president is at this time. His name is Woodrow Wilson. A good way to remember is WW. So, Woodrow Wilson, World War I. Maybe that'll help you. Wilson actually was very anti-involvement. He didn't want us to be in any diplomatic situations over there. He didn't want us to have our military over there. He was not a fan of getting us involved in European affairs, especially a European war. He was not going to bring us there. However, things may change. Even though he wanted to keep us neutral, he actually even won. Sorry, just remember this. He won his re-election. His tagline was, "He kept us out of war." That was the tagline that he won. People were so glad that this president kept us out of World War I, so let's keep him president again. Well, two things happened that threatened that neutrality. Number one of our ships was bombed. This is a merchant ship, so it had trading, it had products, it had people on there, but it was not a warship. Germany tried to claim that, they thought that we were a threat, they thought we were helping, but it was a normal trading merchant ship. And Germany was supposed to not be attacking us. They attacked us with their U-boats, if you remember that from last year, like they're really good submarine things. But yeah, it was an innocent ship. Innocent Americans died, and that obviously made a lot of people angry in America. We also intercepted a note. Actually, Britain intercepted it and then gave it to us. But Germany was talking to Mexico about the fact, do you remember this from last year? If they joined in, if Mexico could make an alliance with Germany, they actually realized, they kind of promised Mexico, hey, remember that land that America stole from you in the Mexican-American War? Well, if America comes into World War I, and if you and us, if we're fighting America from a two-front war, we can totally defeat them. And we'll give you that old land. Do you see that picture on the slide? We'll give you that old land, and we'll dominate America. So that is the Zimmerman note. So combine that with the ship being bombed, innocent Americans dying. And so the pressure was on. More and more Americans want us to get involved, if anything, out of revenge. So reluctantly, Wilson said, okay, we're going to join the war, we're going to fight with the Allies, and we're going to fight against the Central Powers. So in 1917, we officially joined the war. Now, the reading that I'm giving you is going to go into way more in depth into all of these topics, but definitely write down as much as you can from that reading, the key points, put some things in your own words, but I'm going to briefly touch the surface. Make sure you get all the other details from the reading, okay? So when we look at this war, even though we were only in it for 1 year, it actually changed our country a lot. So I'm going to look at political, economic, and social changes. Political changes. The first political change is the government actually created a committee on public information. Basically, our government knew that a lot of people didn't want us to be in war. Yes, some people did out of revenge, but most of Americans did not want us involved in World War I. So the CPI was given the task, you need to sell the war to the public. You need to tell them that this is a good thing. You need to tell them that this was the right decision, that we were supposed to be involved in World War I. What does this translate into? Propaganda. You know what propaganda is? It's a message. It's a biased message. It's trying to send you a certain idea. And propaganda can be good. It can also be really bad. But this propaganda is specific. It's pro-U.S. involvement in the war. So we get all this type of propaganda. In fact, there's a couple of videos in the reading. Make sure you watch those videos. They're really good. It talks about how we inspired people to join the war. We're telling them to buy war bonds. We are making them hate the Germans because maybe if they hate the Germans so much, they will support us fighting them. Does that make sense? The most successful thing is actually called the 4-Minute Men. So you remember the Minutemen from the Revolutionary War, maybe? They were true patriot men that were going to be ready in a minute to fight in the American Revolution or the Revolutionary War. But in this case, the 4-Minute Men are people that signed up for our army, enlisted, and they actually just travel from town to town and they give a 4-minute speech of why people should join the war effort. And if you're a man, why you should enlist. And so the 4-Minute Men were incredibly successful. It's basically, I mean, actually, we kind of have it still today. If you notice at South, we used to have different people from the armed forces come in and talk to you guys. I mean, that's propaganda. If you see people in a uniform saying, hey, you should join the Navy, you should join the Marines, it's not like it's bad, but it's just a way to get the word out for, why you should care, why you should enlist. And overall, a big political change is that just the federal government is getting more involved. They have a louder voice during World War I. They're definitely, controlling a lot of things during a war, which you'll see a lot of this. We saw it in the Civil War, and we'll see it in World War II as well. Okay, there's a lot of economic changes, which shouldn't surprise you because war is expensive. So this tends to happen every time we're in a war, is that taxes increase. Because how do we pay for everything? How do we pay for all the ammunition, the materials, the food, all the uniforms? I mean, the list goes on and on. If we go to war, usually taxes increase. So this actually even started in the Civil War. That was when Lincoln issued the first ever income tax to help pay for the Civil War. Well, here we are in World War I, and we have the War Revenue Act. Basically, this again raised income tax rates. But the biggest thing that it did, in my opinion, is it lowered the amount. I worded it weird on here, sorry. It lowered the amount that you had to have to where you paid the income tax. So whatever that number was before, like you had to be making 10,000 a year, whatever it was, they lowered it. So I think they actually lowered it to making 1,000, which makes sense for World War I time. So if you made $1,000 a year, now you are getting your income tax. Now that you have to pay taxes. That explains the next bullet point. Americans who were paying income tax went from that number, 437,000 in 1916, so only that amount of people were paying income tax, to 4.4 million people in 1918. So that explains the big jump, is that now suddenly more people are paying income tax. They need it for the war, so they lowered that threshold. Then the government is inspiring people to buy war bonds. War bonds help the government with instant cash flow. So a war bond is when you buy a bond, you give the government cash, and it's kind of like you hold on to that bond, and you know that after the war, the government's going to pay you back. And the longer you hold on to that bond, you're actually gaining interest. So if you want to cash it out right away, you can, but if you want to hold on to that bond, you will gain a little bit of interest over time. Again, the government might end up paying you more money later, but they get their instant cash flow immediately, which is what they need in the war. Okay, they also created the War Industries Board. Basically, this is kind of crazy. They kind of took over and basically told people, if you're making consumer goods, like for normal life, you need to start making war materials. So this happens in World War II as well, and it's kind of the reason we win World War II. But the idea here is, okay, you made pencils, now you're going to make bullets. oh, you used to make all of these different types of dresses for women. Okay, you're going to make one type of dress now, and then you're going to use that extra fabric for making uniforms. So again, the concept is consumer goods go to war materials. There's the National War Labor Board that is set up. This is supposed to mitigate or lessen the conflicts between workers and their bosses, because you guys know people are still going on strike, they're still forming unions, they're still protesting for better conditions. So during war, there's kind of a government agency to handle those difficulties. Then the government created something called the Food Administration. This is also in World War II as well, but I think this is so interesting. Um, I mean, maybe I'm just a geek, but there was a spirit of self-sacrifice. That's how Herbert Hoover, a member of our government, he'll be a later president, but he was the one who in charge of all of this, and he really was trying to push that message that in a time of war, World War I, the war to end all wars, we have to sacrifice some things. You're not going to be having the same exact life if your entire country is at war. So, regarding food, we obviously have to feed our troops and feed our allies who might be short on food. So, what the Food Administration is trying to do is inspire people to buy less food, um, so that that excess food can go to the war effort. So there's all these different things in the reading. Make sure you write it down. But there was Meatless Monday. Don't buy meat on Monday. And save that meat for the boys. That was kind of the idea. The other cute thing that I love is that they inspired people to make victory gardens. That's what they called it. There's a lot of propaganda about victory gardens. Make a garden. Don't go buy this food, that fruit and vegetables that could go to our troops. Grow your own. And in fact, grow so much that you can even make donations to the troops. So I thought this was really cool for the average American to get involved. Simply growing your own food is seen as a patriotic act right now. So you saw kids, teenagers, high schools, churches, people all around growing their own food. And it was a show of like, we're all in this together. Yes, High School Musical reference. We're all in this together. And we are being patriotic by doing our part. Lastly, there is, just like the Food Administration, there is the Fuel Administration. Conserving fuel is important during this time. Conserving resources in general like this. So similar to the food stuff, people were inspired to do Gasless Sunday. There was a lot of, life by candlelight during this time. Again, just saving resources in that way too. Okay, there's a lot of social changes. Again, I cannot believe that this war was only 1 year and it caused so many changes in our country. First off, this is actually in the beginning of the reading, but this would be a social change, is that a lot of Americans were pacifists, meaning they did not agree with violence or wars. And there's going to be a shift to people agreeing with signing up for this war in the armed forces. So that's a social change, and definitely get more notes from the reading. Women, their role changes a lot in World War I. Now, it changes a lot in World War II. That's when Rosie the Riveter, there's even more stuff in World War II. But in World War I, we do see some massive changes. Because so many men are fighting in World War I, women are definitely taking over more male-dominated jobs, either in the farming, they're just handling it all, or the industrial jobs, they're in there too. But even if you're at home and you're a homemaker and you're a stay-at-home mom type stuff, actually there was a lot of propaganda geared toward them too over their domestic responsibilities in the war effort. So even this picture on this slide, do you see that one? Sow the seeds of victory, plant and raise your own vegetables. You're at home, but you and your kids should be making a victory garden. You should be exercising your patriotism in whatever realm of life that you're in. Now, this is not in the reading about the 19th Amendment, but I wanted to give you just a little foreshadow, a little glimpse. this all ties together. So our involvement in World War I, specifically how it affected women, is one of those things that made women so frustrated that they still didn't have the right to vote. Because again, they are being used valuably, like they are a valuable asset to this country, yet they aren't given the equality even in political rights. So, I mean, after World War I ended and we saw how much of an impact women made in the war effort, it kind of was like, Wilson, come on. Like, look what we just did as Americans. Why haven't you given us the right to vote? So that's maybe why the National Women's Party was so aggressive at Wilson, because he claimed to be this champion of democracy. We claimed as Americans to be a champion of democracy, and yet we have so many people that can't even vote in our country. This was a huge change for African Americans too, and some African Americans were split. Some Black Americans were split in the idea of should they get involved or not. W.E.B. Du Bois and the NAACP, they were in support of joining the war effort. This idea of it'll be a showcase of our equality if we sign up, if we enlist, if we join in, and we're all Americans. So maybe this will give us one step closer to equality. But other Black Americans were like angry. Frankly, they were angry that we were getting involved in yet another European issue, quote unquote, fighting for democracy, but we still have massive discrimination here. So Black Americans were definitely split. Some of them thought we should join the war effort. Some of them kind of were against it. But regardless, the biggest thing here is jobs. Because again, so many men are fighting in World War I. There was a huge job opening, huge job shortage. So Black Americans are taking those jobs and proving that they can do it. It's kind of a big step. And in fact, a lot of these jobs are in northern cities. So this actually marks a big population shift in our country. After the Civil War, primarily Black Americans stayed in the South. Some of them went up to the North, but it was kind of, what's the phrase? Semi more comfortable to stay in the South. Even though racial tensions were terrible in the South, they at least knew agricultural work. They knew the area. They knew the states. If they went up to the North, it would just be so many unknowns. But we're in World War I now. A lot of time has passed, and we actually initiate something called the Great Migration, which you can see in the picture on the bottom right. Black Americans start going in massive waves to the north, Chicago, New York, and St. Louis, these big major cities. Now there's massive racial tensions in the north. The reading talks about Red Summer, and we'll talk about that more too, but get that information down in your notes. Of course, during World War I, it brings up a lot of hysteria. Hysteria is kind of like panic. And sometimes when people panic, they do things that are, frankly, dumb because they're acting out of fear and not out of rationality. So what I'm talking about here is that because we were at war with Germany and many other European nations, there just became this, again, a fear of immigrants. Massive nativism is increasing again. And honestly, it's really targeted towards German Americans. The reading goes into this, but guys, it is so sad. People are getting killed because they just have German last names. People are getting hurt, people getting harassed, people are getting fired because they have German last names or a German accent. Or again, they could have been here way before World War I started, but now there's just this massive wave of hatred towards Germans. In fact, a lot of stuff that was named after Germans was changed. So like hamburger, like the hamburger you guys know, is actually from Hamburg, Germany. And during World War I, they didn't want to say hamburger, and so they called it a Liberty sandwich. I know that sounds so dumb. I'll have one Liberty sandwich, please. But again, that's hysteria for you. This fear of immigrants, hatred of immigrants makes you do some crazy, stupid things sometimes. But yeah, they even stopped teaching German in school. They stopped playing Beethoven and Mozart. And they just, again, it was out of this fear of we're in this massive war. What if they're infiltrating us? Yada, yada. Speaking of infiltration, that leads us to the last major point, last major social change. The government instituted, I guess this would be political too. The government instituted two laws called the Espionage and Sedition Acts. We will for sure talk about these two because they are huge. And the court case, Schneck versus the United States. Make sure you get information on both of these. Basically, if you're even suspicious or being caught as being a spy, boom, you're out of here. If you're an immigrant, you're being deported. If you're an American citizen, you're going to go into prison. Like, they are really, really sensitive about any sort of spy, espionage stuff. The sedition thing is pretty crazy. I'm sure people in 2021 have opinions about this. Sedition means speech. So during World War I, our government limited our speech. We couldn't say anything bad about the government. We couldn't say anything bad about our involvement in the war, which is why Schneck gets in trouble. You'll see. But yeah, you go to prison, you get a fine if you're saying anything anti-America or anti the government during a time of war. Be thinking why the government did this. Why would the government want to limit people's speech? I guess their negative speech. Why do they want to limit it during a time of war? We will definitely talk about that in class. Okay, spoiler alert, World War I ends and the Allies win. Okay, so World War I ends, the Allies win. We were only in the war for a year. But since we are a major country, a major power, we are definitely a big voice with how this war is going to end. World War I was called the War to End All Wars. So theoretically, this was supposed to be our only world war. We hated it as a nation, as a world. We didn't want this massive conflict. And so Wilson, as our leader, Woodrow Wilson, he's going to design an ending that is supposed to launch our world into peace. And that's what a lot of people wanted, for this to be the only world war. So look at his 14 points. Again, this is in the reading, but just get it down to in your notes. The first, also guys, it's 14 points, so it's just 14 different things. So number one, there's no secret treaties. So again, we don't want that accidental world war to happen again. We want open diplomacy. We want to talk as from country to country openly. Freedom of the seas. That kind of comes from our personal experience of being randomly attacked for no reason. But definitely in the oceans, we wanted freedom of seas, not this fear of, oh man, if my ship goes near your country, you're just going to kill us. Like, that's going to cause problems. Number three, removal of economic barriers, lower the tariffs. Basically, we should be cooperating with one another as nations, trading with one another as nations. Number four, reduction of arms. Basically, he was trying to propose a plan that is reducing militarism. Maybe there'd be limits. Maybe there would be weapons that were off limits. But in general, he was trying to think of an idea that would, reverse militarism. Let's all plan to reduce our armies because building up armies sounds like you're doing it for a reason. Number five, adjustment of colonial practices. Maybe you should consider the colonies and the imperial powers. Woodrow Wilson was not really big into imperialism, but he's basically saying here, if you're going to take over a colony, if you're going to take over a territory, there should be consideration on both parties. The people that you're planning to take over, maybe you shouldn't take them over if they really don't want to, because that's kind of going to cause problems and potentially more wars later on. Points 6 through 13, I kind of summarized them. They basically deal with different countries and nations and their boundaries. And basically, the theme here for points 6 through 13 is self-determination. Honestly, when big, powerful countries They often decide where all these little countries are and what the lines and boundaries are. And Wilson is saying that's not the way it should be. Why don't we let the ethnic groups decide, self determine what their boundary and what their nation is? And lastly, the most famous point, number 14 of the 14th points, he envisioned this idea of a global peacekeeping organization. It's going to be called the League of Nations. It's basically an idea where every country in the world comes together, discusses ideas, discusses problems diplomatically. So that means negotiations, peaceful, no war. Let's try to talk it out before we just shoot it out, if that makes sense. Um, so after you're looking at his 14 points, definitely write your answer down to this question. Do you think his plan is effective in creating peace and avoiding another war? So the 14 points, do you think his plan is effective in creating peace and avoiding another war? Don't do yes or no. Explain your answer to this question because we will definitely talk about it together. Here are two political cartoons that share their opinion about his 14 points. The picture on the left says, can he produce the harmony? In front of him, in front of the orchestra person, I don't know the name of it, someone else does, and they're laughing right now. It says World Peace Symphony. So he's trying to take all these crazy countries together, have all the different labels on them, and he's trying to orchestrate peace. And so it's saying, can he produce the harmony? The one on the right is Woodrow Wilson again. He has basically that's a dove, and what he's holding is an olive branch. And so if you've ever seen this image of a dove holding an olive branch in its little beak, that actually is a symbol for peace. But the problem here in this picture to the right is what? What looks weird? Other than the little bird's face. The olive branch is huge. It's big. It says the League of Nations. Is that actually going to fit in the little beak of the dove? Is peace achievable? That's kind of what that political cartoon is arguing. Well, it doesn't matter because the Allies rejected Wilson's plan. So there's 4 Allied powers together, England, France, Italy, and us. And honestly, guys, our involvement in this war versus their involvement in this war is very different. Again, we came in at the end. They've been fighting the entire time. Germany has wrecked some of their economies. Germany has killed a lot of their people. Germany has decimated some of their land. So I kind of get the other allies of why they're so angry, and how Wilson maybe had a different point of view. These 3 guys were in the war longer. So they definitely have a different idea. The slogan that you need to remember is the idea of make Germany pay. Again, if we go backwards, this is Austria-Hungary and Serbia. But Germany was the strongest ally to Austria-Hungary, and basically people are angry for all the destruction that Germany caused. We need to make them pay. Also, they're looking at Wilson and saying, how naive. They don't think the 14 points is realistic. They don't think the 14 points would work. And honestly, they don't even want to try the 14 points because they have a different background, a different experience from World War I. Now, actually, in this peace conference, so this is the Treaty of Versailles, this is ending of World War I, there's actually some problems with this peace conference in general. Number 1, when you're ending a war, even if there's a group that won, sometimes you would invite the losers because you're saying, okay, we're ending this war. We're going to make a treaty that officially ends this war. And maybe you're not going to listen to their input, but they're usually invited at least to the conference. This one did not include the Central Powers at all. Didn't invite the leaders of Germany, didn't invite the leaders of the other countries. We're just not getting their input. Also, I don't know if you caught this, but the Allies had Russia on their side for most of World War I, but they left at the end of World War I because there was the Communist Revolution happening. So what's interesting is at the end, the peace conference, we did not include Russia. Partially because they've kind of changed as a country. They've had these internal rebellions and revolutions. They're now communist, so we didn't include them in any of this, which might bite us in the butt later. So the only four people, the big guys that are there are representatives, leaders of United States, Britain, France, and Italy. So that's those four guys right there. So what is the actual treaty? Okay, well, number one, it's going to create new nations. They're not going to listen to Wilson. They're not going to do self-determination. They're going to just create certain nations that they think need to be created, yada, yada. Britain and France got temporary colonies, so little areas that apparently they wanted Britain and France to look over, to watch over, to help, etc., etc. Germany gets a lot of punishment. You guys remember this from last year? Germany gets like, man, if they wanted to make Germany pay, they got that. Germany can't have an army. Germany has to pay $33 billion in war reparations. Germany has to sign something called the War Guilt Clause, which basically says this war is all your fault. And all the colonial possessions that they had get taken away from them. So you can't have an army, you have to pay a bunch of money, all the wars are your fault, and maybe the way you made money is now stripped from you. Cool. Okay. That's probably going to cause some problems. And very surprising, man, from left field, they actually took the 14th point. In the Treaty of Versailles, they created the League of Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you have the answer to this question in your notes somewhere. How could the weaknesses in this treaty cause another world war? Make sure you fully flesh out that answer. How could the weaknesses in this treaty, the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I, how could it cause another world war? Okay, let's talk about the League of Nations. Remember, it is a global peace organization. It is designed by Woodrow Wilson. The idea was for every nation to get involved, for us to diplomatically, calmly talk about problems before going to war. I do also, though, want to mention that there was an article of the League of Nations that said this. Member states of the League of Nations are to go to war on each other's behalf in the event of an unprovoked act of aggression. So the League of Nations, again, in its core, is supposed to be peaceful, but it's also an alliance. So if anyone in the League of Nations gets attacked, an unprovoked act of aggression, then every other country in the League of Nations is supposed to join in and fight together. So again, you're just signing up for this big alliance. Have your answer to this in your notes. What are the pros and cons to America joining in the League of Nations? What are the benefits of being a part of the League of Nations? What are the downfalls of being a part of the League of Nations? The United States has a complicated relationship with the League of Nations. Basically, there was people that were against it. They believed in something called U.S. sovereignty, which means we do what we want. If we commit ourselves to an alliance, then we will be bogged down by whatever the League of Nations decides. Now we have to fight in any war. Like, there was many people against this. They did not want to sign up. America is strong enough by itself. We have these two oceans to protect us. Mexico's not a threat to us. Canada's not a threat to us. We feel pretty protected where we are. We don't want to join an alliance that we don't need to. And honestly, other Americans got scared by World War I. World War I changed people's lives. People lost family members. People had to pay more taxes. People lost jobs. If you were an immigrant, your life just sucked during World War I. World War I freaked a lot of people out. So actually, America is going to become isolationist. Again, many Americans are becoming isolationists, which means they don't want to deal in European affairs. They just want to focus on what's happening in America. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the United States never joined the League of Nations. You might remember this from last year. Now, something you may not know is that actually Woodrow Wilson was really sick during this time. He was actually dying. He had a really, really bad sickness. And so if you're thinking to yourself, how could it be that the guy who thought of the idea of League of Nations, how could he not lead us into the League of Nations? He might have if he was healthy. He might have spoke up and gathered support and rallied support and did propaganda and got more people on his side. But it's crazy how a sickness could alter US foreign policy, because the only voices that people were hearing were the people that were anti-League of Nations. Unfortunately, what this political cartoon is showing you is that the United States actually was the keystone of the League of Nations. It does look really bad that one of the big four, one of the main people, the person that thought of it, the country that thought of this idea, didn't even join it. That obviously is going to send a message to the rest of the world that maybe this is a joke, maybe this doesn't even work. Why would I even join it if the United States isn't even joining it? All these other countries did, but without that keystone, without that middle stone, it's not going to work. And honestly, a lot of nations did not join the League of Nations, and the League of Nations did not prove to be successful. Maybe if we would have joined, maybe it would have. Who knows? Okay, I am not going to read this. Some of you were just like, you just dropped your jaw. You were like, oh my God, Miss Coleman, why would you? No, I'm not going to read all of this, but I am giving you the reading in a PDF. I'm asking you to write your notes with it too. But in case you wanted a summary of everything I just said, in case you wanted just a quick slide to look at, I post the slides too. You can read this on your own time and just kind of see, okay, what did happen in America? What are the changes that happened regarding the time period of World War I? I also added some key terms and definitions. There's a bunch of key terms that I've already mentioned in this slide, but I just pulled out a couple. Again, this isn't even all of them, but hopefully you can look at these terms and know, again, what they are. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is American involvement in World War I.